Oh, hello, Beck. Welcome, everybody. This is another session that we hope you will enjoy from Be Well Co. I'm Amy Smith, Chief Transformation Officer. I've got two wonderful colleagues with me. Matt is the head of research, analytics, and all things statistical. And Joep is the CEO of Be Well Co. And as you know, we have been working in this languishing space for some time now. And we are absolutely thrilled to be now delving into the not just languishing, but languishing and the implications for work. So we have done a survey. It is really, really interesting to see some of the myths that we've busted, but also to get into the feelings of languishing at work. And we're going to be sharing those insights with you today, talking about the implications. As always, we are going to have a very open and I hope very vibrant chat on the side. So there will be 3 polls that we do throughout that are linked to insights and implications for you to have your say on what you think. But throughout, please feel free. I am monitoring the chat, and when we get comments that we want to stop and maybe spend some time on, we will. So again, welcome everybody. And you want to see Kevin. So just for everybody, I have a Kelpie called Kevin. Everyone loves Kevin. Kevin is sitting on in the bed, but I've blurred the background because then it's always all about Kevin. So we're just not going to talk about Kevin at the moment. Now, so welcome, Matt. Welcome, you. So what we'll do today, I think first, is just discuss a little bit about what is languishing and languishing at work in particular, and how is it different from your regular garden varieties, sort of stress, burnout, depression. Joep, can you take that question, please?
Sure, I'll kick us off. Yeah, if you look at languishing, I'm just going to assume that not everyone has read either the fact sheet or the report that we did on this in the early parts of the year. But to give a bit of a low key definition, when you languish, you aren't really content with your life and yourself. You don't really feel good, and you're struggling to function in general, right? And that's still pretty high level description. But generally, what it means is that you aren't really optimistic about where things are going. You don't feel a sense of autonomy. You can't really feel like you're growing or you're developing yourself. You feel a bit disconnected, not motivated, and languishing in general applies that to life. But for this latest one, we applied it to the workplace. So you don't really feel at home at work. You're not having a sense of joy. You don't really feel a connection or that sense of meaning and purpose. And
so it's not. Sorry
yeah,
to
sorry.
interrupt. It's not just having a blah day or
No.
a bit. I'm feeling a bit off today. It's bigger than that. It is a form of suffering, that is happening in the now. This is not a great way to kind of feel, is it? It's serious in that regard, but it's not necessarily acute distress where you are probably can't get out of bed.
No, and you indicating that it's more than just a day of feeling blah is really important, because we get that question quite a lot in the work that we do. So it has to be happening over a prolonged period of time, in the same way as that burnout and depression have to be happening over a different amount of time. But where we get a bit of confusion is that we use some of the symptoms like feeling blah or not having a lot of energy, and we hear those and then we think, oh, that actually just sounds like low-grade depression, or it sounds like low-grade burnout. But when you start looking at kind of the symptoms on each side, they're quite different. So
Yeah,
for
okay.
example, if you look at depression, right, you need to feel a persistent state of sadness and lose interest in most activities. And you can kind of still see the overlap with languishing. But if you want to get diagnosed with depression, there's a whole bunch of other ticks that you need to get. And in order to get those ticks, you need to have like problems sleeping, feeling worthless. So like life is not worth living. You actually might have some physical stuff. That's completely different to, you're experiencing a loss of positive relationships, or you don't feel like you're having engagement or optimism, right?
Yeah.
Completely different. And in the workplace, burnout is a reaction to prolonged stress. So you can feel physically or emotionally or mentally exhausted, but there needs to be a stressor there.
Yeah.
And it needs to have been happening over a period of time. Whereas for languishing, it's not always related to a stressor, and
Okay.
it's not just exhaustion. So
Well,
there's a bit of overlap, but they need to be seen as things that are separate, and they cause separate problems.
and they are interlinked in a sense, and we'll get into it in a bit. That if one is left undressed, then not
Yeah.
addressed, and the rest can follow. I think the other interesting thing, like the first piece of work that we did, identified 1 in 5, 20, just over 20%. Matt, can you talk to us now about this recent piece at work, and just set it up for everybody to paint the scene about how we went about it, and then we're going to get into what it feels like, and then the 6 main insights with implications, and that's where we're going to have hopefully a lot of interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, obviously, a big part of our work at Be Wellco is to bring focus to this issue of languishing. And so we're seeing it sort of a similar trend, I guess, in the research on flourishing, this idea that we want to be capturing both quantitative and qualitative experiences. So not just what do the sort of the strict surveys tell us, but what do people say themselves? Because we
Yeah.
want to make sure that we're pretty close to people's experience of these ideas. And so
Yep.
that's where we wanted to try something different in a sense with this brief kind of check-in survey. It was how is languishing showing up at work?
Yeah.
How do
What
people
are people
describe it
feeling?
in there? Yeah, because I guess we know that it's so, like you said, Amy, it's 1 in 5 is what we see of people who are languishing yet
Yep.
don't experience any symptoms of mental illness. So it's a very common experience, and I think we
Okay.
sometimes feel like we fail to make it sound common because we use some of the more scientific language. And so hearing what people say themselves is really important, and then
Totally.
hearing where it comes from in their own opinion as well.
And also the feeling. So I was just thinking, lovely Liv, who's managing this for us, mainly because I'm so technologically unable to. But if Liv could just put up some of the descriptors of the feelings, because what I'd love to know from everyone is, have you ever or do you currently feel any of these things? But think about this as a word cloud. This is some of the qual stuff. But if you think about it, we had a lot of in-depth discussion about the experience of it. I looked at this and went, wow, this feels very much like someone who is experiencing just enormous frustration as well, for feeling stuck, flat, lost, disconnected, purposeless, and maybe the saddest thing is just not having that capacity to feel joy. So if anyone could have got any other brilliant words that are not on this, please feel free, and if you have experienced languishing, to contribute them, because I think the more we can use language to describe something, and the more that we can name it, then it sort of becomes something that is I mean, this is not something that people are unaware of completely, but I feel like the more that we describe it and use language to define it, the more people can then obviously understand it in themselves and in other people. I love that waiting for something to happen. I know you're waiting to see Kevin, but it's not going to happen. But everything, this is feeling unsafe. That's interesting, because I wonder whether it's unsafe or just, when I've experienced it, just feeling completely like I didn't have any confidence, and I felt like I was just so unsure, like not sure-footed, couldn't really get into my power source. So I think it's very interesting to hear other people's language. So please feel free. Why don't we get into some of these insights? Because that's really, I love that, exposed, vulnerable, fear, just fantastic that people are sharing.
Yeah, one
Not
that really
belonging is huge, that feeling of disconnection. I mean, that's probably the most awful thing, to feel like you're just not connected and that you can't connect. So let's get into these. The boys want to do this in a very loose and free-flowing way, but please feel free to contribute as well. So the first insight, we're going to talk about the implications. We don't need to necessarily go through this because I'm assuming that a lot of you have read the stuff that we've put out, but can you just tell me what this is showing us, and why is this so interesting and different from what we might have thought in other markets or previously?
Yeah, and as Amy kind of alluded to, me and Matt like to use like jazz hands and a British accent while we talk about our findings. So I'll try and rein that in for sake of clarity. The first finding, what we really try to figure out is, okay, if we ask people to think about languishing at home versus languishing at work. What does that feel like? And particularly if someone said that they were languishing at home or at work, how many people had overlap between these two areas? And the reason why we were interested in that is because there was a recent study being done in the States by Keyes and one of his colleagues, and they found quite an interesting finding where not everybody took the languishing experience from home into work and the other way around. So there were quite a big proportion of people who didn't have that. But when we asked it in our Australian sample versus the American sample that Keyes used, we actually got quite a lot of overlap, more than what Keyes found in his study. So what we found here is that if you languish at home, you're likely to also languish at work. And
Right.
similarly, if you languish at work, you're also likely to take that into home. So when we think about, work-life split and trying to leave our baggage at the office door, that's really difficult according to our respondents. Whereas within the survey that Keyes, for example, did, there was a bit more room for that. But what we found is that blurring is pretty difficult when it comes to languishing, and that raises all kind of important questions for employers, right? Like, where does my responsibility lie, and
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
do I move beyond my responsibility to thinking about my employees as humans beyond the office door or the MS Teams virtual room?
Yeah, we've just seen a comment here where the survey is the same, as in exactly the same. No, they weren't. They weren't. But what I think is interesting is that there is a relationship between work and home. And maybe since COVID, that blurring we've seen means that, you can no longer say as an employer that you have to just have complete separation between the two, because it's virtually impossible. But we have got a couple of people saying that they find it hard to leave feelings at work, and that's even harder when you're actually doing work from home, I'm assuming. I mean, I certainly experienced that. But also the feeling one in one and not the other. So you saying that languishing at home, you're definitely languishing at work as well. Languishing at work, you may be languishing at home.
No, I'm saying for both of them, right? So if you
Right,
language at home, that's the one on the left, right? So
right.
84% says that they also language at work, and then the other one around, if you language at work, 91%, it's you language at home. But the questions were different. We just simply asked, do you feel that you language at home, and do you feel like you language at work, which is not what Keyes did. I do have to give it to Katie. Normally, Jackson asks these methodological questions, but it's good to see that Katie, who's also from WA, keeps the WA methodology track record going. But it's good for us. This was really important insight, because for us it's really around this idea about blurring, and there's a lot
Yeah,
of noise around regulations and obligations for workplaces. And it's
yeah,
really important to think about what you need to do. But what
yep.
we want to open up with this is a conversation about what you should be doing when it comes to your people's well-being, because
Okay.
just investing in the workplace isn't enough. And our next insights actually also show you that.
Yeah, that's great. Let's go there. And Maddie, take it away.
Yeah, so this was when we basically asked, so for the people who, and to Katie's point, this was really about asking people when they thought they were languishing and their experiences of what that looked like in their life. And so when we asked about what they thought the consequences were of languishing at work, this is what we heard from people.
Yeah,
And it sounds exactly like quiet quitting and all those kinds of related terms that we've probably experienced or heard about or seen. As just as a note on the results, we basically let people respond to all, like, kind of like tick all that apply, so it doesn't add up to 100 just as an
yeah,
indication. But what we see here is that people were by far and away feeling less creative, less innovative, less productive.
yeah.
Um,
And that's really kind of, if you think about how much emphasis there is on productivity and the Productivity Commission, and there's been all this stuff in the media about we're not as productive, and productivity requires innovation, energy, creativity, teamwork, all those things. Um, Matt, is it safe to say that this is about people actually showing up to work, so they're present? I think, you know, we've been calling it presenteeism, and I think in the Productivity Commission report, it actually put a value of $7 billion against just presenteeism, not absenteeism or anything else. But is it safe to say that people are rocking up, but they just are on snooze? They're just not able to fire?
Yeah, and maybe on snooze is maybe putting too fine of a point on it, in the sense that you can be rocking up and doing, like, snooze sounds like you're doing nothing, right? But you could be doing the bare minimum or just a little bit above the bare minimum,
Yeah.
but certainly not at your best.
Okay.
Right? And
Okay.
so, looking at some of the rest of the things here, interacting less with colleagues, that's obviously going to have implications on culture and how it feels to be in a workplace,
Yeah.
less interested in progressing career, less interested in team goals, and as we said at the bottom, they're taking more leave. So there is, as international research has shown, there is a link between sick leave and languishing, for sure. But I
Yep.
guess what this is pointing to us is that potentially that sick leave, that so we put a dollar value on languishing in terms of sick leave, that might be a massive underestimation
Of what it
considering
is.
this productivity cost that we're looking at here.
Well, and
Yeah.
it's super hard, right? Because you're not going to go up and say, look, I'm languishing. I've got no motivation. I don't feel like I'm, those are really tough. We're going to get into this later to sort of say, how can we start to address it? But in a work context, that would be very difficult. So I guess people are just keeping their heads down, but feeling pretty miserable. And that's absolutely tragic. It's a very suboptimal, or as my mother often says, not ideal way to be living at work. Okay, let's get into the third insight.
Wait, but sorry, could I? I'd love to just make two more points around this
Oh,
before we move on. So one thing, like when you read the fact sheet, or even when you go through these results, I just want you to ask, like, what do these findings mean for your industry, right? So if you're a highly creative industry where people need to come up with creative solutions, having 71% say that they really lack in that space is a major issue, right? If you're a team leader who is trying to think about succession planning or trying to think about the next generation coming through, having about 1 in 2, so about 50% saying that people are not interested in progressing their career goals or are not interested in team goals, that's a major issue. So yes,
yeah,
think about psychosocial risk and think about leadership development, but languishing is a key indicator that you want to be thinking about. And one final point on that dollar figure that you said. So the Productivity Commission estimates it at 7 billion. Some of the clients that we work with do their own calculations, and some of them actually look at a dollar value for the presenteeism versus absenteeism side. And one of the organizations we work with for quite a long time, they actually see that presenteeism is costing them more than absenteeism as a dollar figure. So really something you want to be asking some questions about, both if you're looking at it from like the human development side, but
yeah,
also if you're starting to worry about, your bottom line and your profit and loss.
yeah, yeah,
Especially if we're thinking that, I'm sure that most of the people in this chat will be thinking that we're about to be, asked to do more with less going forward. And so this burden of presenteeism and languishing becomes even greater.
yeah, yeah. It's gaining momentum, this kind of concept of presenteeism and quiet quitting. But I can see, if you have somebody who's not firing and who's not contributing, and particularly if there's a team leader who's feeling this way, that the ripple effect, for wanting to a better phrase, it can be enormous, and culturally and on morale and all sorts of other things. Okay, well, let's get into 3, and we're going to do a poll at this point once we've gone through this. But looking at why. Oh, now hang on. I have to move that across because that's just blocked the slide for me. I do it every time. It never gets old. I know. So workplace languishing affected by organisational and personal reasons. Let's just discuss the implications for this, because Joep was kind of talking about it then. We know that there are certain things, like we always talk about leadership, we always talk about job design, etc. But let's just expand on this. Both of you, what are your thoughts on not just tracking it, but what are the sorts of things that this graph is telling us that we need to focus on?
Yeah, Matt, you want to give it a crack, or you want me to?
Yeah, look, I
do
think
it?
it basically, yeah, look, it speaks to this idea that everyone, I think, agrees to, which is that individual level solutions alone are not enough, and workplace level solutions alone are not enough. It's both and, as it always is. So when we ask people about causes of languishing, leadership, specific role and job comes up. I think that will be no surprise to anybody. Team, so the sort of the social interactions as well, but a pretty sizable percentage. So 1 in 3, nearly 31% of people talking about stuff that has nothing to do with work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's the complexity here. And I think this Corey Keyes's report that came out speaks to this even more, because the difference there that they found was that if you are languishing at home, you are very likely to be languishing at work. So what are workplaces to do about that?
Yeah.
Is a really important question.
And when we look at leadership, I mean, this is kind of,
Mm.
is it I like my boss, I understand, my job role, I have clarity, so I don't have any confusion or conflict around that. Is that kind of, is that what this is kind of what's under this in terms of leadership and specific role, job?
Yeah, generally I'd say so. We didn't ask people specifically if you identified leadership, what was it specifically, or if you identified specific role job, what would it be? But generally, when you think about workplace design and the role of leadership, it would be those things, or just simple things like reward and recognition, or
Yep.
them stepping in if there would be bullying or unpleasant behaviors at work.
Yep.
So generally, it would tap into a lot of the areas that leadership training would want leaders to develop in. Where we kind of see an implication here is that that leadership training often focuses more on, tangible workplace behaviors, like how to give reward and recognition, how to deal with conflict,
Sure.
how to have supportive conversations, but it doesn't teach people how to identify when someone is languishing, and then start figuring out where to pinpoint people to make a positive change. And I mean, we'll talk about that later when we
Sure.
talk about some of the solutions. But what the big implication for me here really is that, yes, it highlights organizational factors, but the solutions that we're currently throwing at those organizational factors are likely not going to be sufficient to help us solve this particular problem.
Well, and just all that, when we're looking at the poll, adding it all up, I think the values, when we've interviewed people about languishing, one of the biggest things that they've talked about is they didn't feel like they fitted into that environment. There was no values alignment. There was a sense that there was all this talk, but actually at a behavioral level, that's not what played out. Their values weren't acknowledged. They felt like they just didn't fit. And we've had a bit of that, but I think is that, and that I guess falls into the leadership kind of category as well. That values alignment is really, really important for people, because they need to feel like they're in a place that actually respects and values them. So what did we see on the poll? Let's see, we got 100 people answered. Lack of growth opportunities, not accessible for team easily. Yep. Position boredom, interesting. Continual change, exhausting, especially when you don't understand why or what the end game is. Work demands, lack of progression. We've seen this a lot. Like, look at these words. They're really, yeah. Lack of transparency, poor communication, lack of clarity, confusion. Yeah, this all sounds pretty frustrating, doesn't it? Well, thank you everybody for answering that. You've given us some fantastic words, but thank you for participating in that, because that's really important. Okay, let's go to the next insight and talk about implications, because this is where I really started to, as a manager previously, this is where I think the rubber hits the road. So yes, we will just show the word cloud in future. Thank you for everyone. That was, we didn't mean to do that. I'm really sorry. So into this kind of, where do we get support? Who is responsible for supporting? How do I get support? Let's just have a chat about this, Matt. What, in terms of leadership, we've just mentioned that it's pivotal. and that training is important, but not just kind of the training for specific things that Joep's mentioned. What is this telling us? That we are not feeling supported, and we're not feeling supported from colleagues, leaders, or the wider organization. And why do you think that's so?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to this issue that, that languishing is basically missing. And, people like Adam Grant and Corey Keyes talk about it as this missing middle child. It's just it's just not part of the conversation, despite affecting so many people. So I think when we ask people basically when you felt like you were languishing, did you feel supported by your colleagues? Basically, not really. By your managers or leaders? Not really. Or by the wider organization? Again, not really. I think a lot of people have this experience of kind of just being flick the link to EAP, and that's kind of problem solved. Do people feel supported when that's the response? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of how do we orient ourselves towards promoting flourishing, obviously as the solution to languishing. And how do we make sure people are feeling supported, knowing that it is this kind of, for years now, I think we've been talking about languishing as this, we've always had a little ninja emoji in all of our slides because it's the group of people who fly under the radar. So in that respect,
And that's not necessarily there. I mean, this is a difficult thing to talk about, particularly in a work context.
Oh, no, I'm definitely not blaming anybody, but the
No,
idea
no. I don't. I know we're not, but I think it is very hard because it's almost like, well, I'm not. When we've talked to people and they've said, look, I know I'm not right. Like I'm not great, but I'm not like I know I'm not acutely kind of suffering distress. So for a lot of people that we talk to, they're like, I didn't even know it was languishing until I started discovering more about it. I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know what to call it. So how could I then go and get support for it or talk about it when even I couldn't put a name to it? So I think a lot of the work that we're doing is trying to address that for starters, and then look at what does that kind of mean in terms of where do you get support and who from, right?
Yeah. And I think particularly in the workplace, but in most of life, I feel like I hear people agreeing with this idea that we're just so often just flying on autopilot,
Yeah.
And so I think when you're on autopilot, you start to normalize some of these feelings. You just kind of can maybe distract yourself just by the rhythm of life, go home, chuck on
Yeah.
Netflix, don't have to think about it, that kind of idea.
Well,
So when we do,
it's not that easy to just go, I'm going to change everything. Most of us have mortgages. Some of us, have, well, I saw something on the weekend about the sandwich generation that Wendy Turi wrote that, we obviously did a webinar about that. But, people are, in some instances, there is a very real feeling of being stuck because they are at that point in time. But that's not necessarily a reason to accept living like this. You don't have to live and feel like this. And I think it's an important thing. We're not saying, well, everybody's got to go and get help and change everything, because the reality is that for many of us, that's not possible at the time.
Yeah, can I just add a couple more thoughts when I look at these slides? So one thing is that even though it's not a lot, people still get most support from colleagues, but a lot of our training when it comes to mental health training or the development capabilities focused on leaders. And while the percentages aren't massive, people do still reach out to staff. So yes, develop capability within your leaders, but do not forget about the capability of your staff at the same time. And there was a comment that there's been a couple of comments coming through that I can kind of tie into this whole piece. Like Therese is indicating, like, is it about not receiving enough support to speak up and show civility and respect? And when we train leaders, we often, as I said, we train them in competency. So we move people up in the ranks because they're good at a certain job, but we fail to acknowledge the leaders that are very good at leading crews and develop them at the same time. So like what goes hand in hand with that, at least in our ethos, is that you also train leaders how to lead mentally healthy teams, not just high performing teams. And that side of like how to lead a mentally healthy team is often neglected, and areas that you're pointing to, Therese, like psychological safety, that kind of underpins that, are an integral part of it. But also what Debbie says and what Tegan is pointing towards, psychosocial hazards, the big topic in workplace mental health, also plays a big role. But don't forget that 1/3 also had personal reasons seeping into the workplace. So just making the workplace the best, most glorious place to work, one, unlikely to completely happen. Sorry that I have to be the Debbie Downer here. But two,
Well, you're
that,
Dutch.
well, yeah, sorry, there's a bit of maybe depressive realism that sits in there. But also, it's just people are bringing stuff from home into the office. So think beyond just the workplace organizational risks, cover them off, but also think about what the human side is that they're bringing into work from home.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think really, really good point. And I really, for most of my life in creative and marketing industries, people get promoted because they are brilliant at playing an instrument, brilliant, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're great conductors of an orchestra. So in terms of getting people to work together, so I think there's some interesting chats between industries as well. Just in terms of the results here, unsupported during a period of low motivation or mental fog. Yes, okay. So we're still coming back to the same thing, which is manager or workplace didn't know how to ask for support, but very few really feeling supported and seen and heard. And I remember having this conversation with Corey Keyes where, he talked about people matter, we matter. And if you're at work and you're languishing and you feel like you're not seen, you're not heard, and that you don't matter, that's a terrible way to feel. So some interesting stuff there. Who's feeling, out of all the cohorts that we talked to, who's feeling the least supported, Maddie? This is getting into Insight 5.
Yeah, so we just we pulled it out, and I was just reading the comment there by Gavin. Thank you, Gavin. There, I think that's just a really nice takeaway. We looked at ages basically, and as you can see here, basically younger staff were actually feeling more supported than older staff.
Is
So
that, you think, because they're more likely to talk to each other, or there's more focus on younger team members? What is it?
it's a question. I don't know. We were kind of discussing this as a team, and there's sort of two sides to it here, which is, there's a strong narrative obviously around the world, around the country, about supporting young people in the workplace, and that, they are going through a very tumultuous time, that kind of 25 to 35-year-old, even as our report showed. So there was kind of a question of sort of the squeaky wheel issue. But we wondered whether there's a cultural difference amongst generations, that maybe older adults are just likely to, not even older adults, just like middle age and older, are just more likely to basically put up with it, and possibly to their detriment.
Yeah, and that squeaky wheel comment, I feel really shouldn't be. Really should emphasize a little bit more. Like there's a tendency to really listen to people who are very vocal, but the vocal ones tend to come from pretty extreme positions, right? So that you tend to not be vocal if you feel like you can put up with something. And that is what we see here within our results, is you have a significant cohort that most probably isn't really speaking up because they think it's normal to have to slog through life, and they think it's normal to not really feel motivated or have joy at work. And the young generation has been taught to speak up, to be vocal about it, and to seek help. But the young generation is only a very it's a sizable proportion of the workplace, but it's not everyone. And there's still a whole bunch of 35, 45, 55-year-olds that are going to be in the workforce for a pretty long time, that we don't want to have slog it out for the next 20 years, because they deserve better. And if you value your team's performance and your team's culture, you deserve better. You should really look into that.
Well, and just to that point, presumably if they're older, they're more likely to be managing other people and in more senior positions, which, then begs the question, are we it's not necessarily the kind of top tier, but, if we're looking at C-suite executives, people who are, now managing people, they're 40, they're 42, or they're and they've got families, they've got other pressures, or even older, as we've talked about, they've got other responsibilities. I feel like we've sort of come from a generation at my age where it's like, well, work's work because it's not play, so suck it up. But that no longer really, I don't think any of us want to experience that. And I guess the question is, how do we make it as permissible for people who are older to have those conversations about how they want to live and how they want to show up and how they deserve to feel fulfilled, and they deserve to kind of enjoy what they're doing, and at least be able to have that conversation if they're not.
Yeah, Amy, on that topic, right? So Lisa is asking a question slash giving a statement around, does it relate to social networks as well? Younger peers may also go out social together, hence talk support. That's actually a very interesting one, because when you actually start digging into that at the office, uh, I'd most probably counter saying that that isn't the case anymore. The young people will socialize together outside of work, but we had a conversation with our board the other week around the function of work. And back in the day, the function of work was more than just your professional development. It was actually also a community where people came
Yeah,
together.
yeah, it
And
was fun.
that shift has happened away from that idea, right? So people are actually not seeing work necessarily as a community anymore. And I think older adults who would expect that from maybe their place of employment in the 90s or the early 2000s might not feel it anymore in this more geographically dispersed work from home flexible arrangement office. So while for my generation it may be great, because young kids, flexibility is good. The lack of going into the office to a certain extent does mean that those social get-togethers have potentially lost momentum.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, last but not least, let's look at and this to me was the most surprising, because it says a lot of things about our perception of other, but it also explains why people perhaps are sitting in languishing where they are currently and not doing anything, because the perception is that it might be worse somewhere else. So, Maddie, is this just better the devil you know? Is that what this is?
Well, this good question, basically, would be my opinion here. I don't know what you think, Joep. But I think it is interesting that when we going kind of overlapping with that question of um, the sort of the age group, what I was going to say before, of like, if I think of my parents that are sort of early 60s or thereabouts at work, I don't think they've ever complained a day in their life. Do you know what I mean? Like, they would have had lots to complain about, I'm sure, knowing the types of jobs that they've had. Um, and I remember I'm just sharing a story of, I remember my mum when she moved job, and she worked in the same place for like 40 years, right? And then moved to another place, and just never ever thought about what would competitors in this field that I work in be like to work. What would it be like to work there? Just never really crossed her mind, right? And so a part of me wonders,
Is it generational?
well, possibly, but even just how much do we think about actively what would it be like to work over there versus to work over here?
Yeah, yeah. I
And
keep saying to my kids, when they're saying, "Oh, it looks better over there because of social media and everything," I keep saying, the grass is not greener over there. It's green where you water it. But I think this is interesting to me, because what it means, sadly, is that people are sitting with this and not
Yeah,
doing anything. So
yeah.
that's, if we can get to the next bit, because I know we're running out of time, but the next slide is where we would really love to have some interaction from you guys. You've been wonderful, by the way. We've got some of the most amazing comments, and again, sorry about the word cloud. Let's go to the last poll, Liv. I think what we want to do, and what the most important thing is that I think we do, is we've got a name for it, we've got language for it, we know who's experiencing it, we know the impact that it's having personally and professionally and how intertwined they are. Not doing anything is not a solution. Hope is not a strategy. We can't just say it's all down to the person to fix it themselves, or it's all up to the workplace. Where do we start? What do we do? And how do we reduce languishing, what are the sorts of things that you think we could be doing and that we could start implementing? Because it feels to me, based on the blurring you, that if you kind of fix something at home, it's going to translate positively into work and vice versa. So if you guys could participate, that would be fab. And
we'll have Liv read these ones out.
And we'll have Liv read these ones out. And everybody, if you haven't seen the survey or any of the stuff that we've talked to, we will get that to you. And also, we've got some videos that have been shot, which are from the point of view of a languishing employee and then a person who's managing that person or team that is now substantially different. You know, they've noticed a shift. They don't know what it is, but they know they've got to do something about it. And it's very much around, we've got to take some action because doing nothing kind of isn't an option. Otherwise, we just get more of the same. And it's too big an issue without wanting to catastrophize it. It clearly is more widespread, isn't it, Matt, than we thought? The feeling of languishing at work is more widespread.
Yeah. And I think the really important part, you know, particularly from that one of those videos that you said depicts the leader, is that, you know, our experience or my experience is not that leaders don't care. Do you know what I mean? So even in that scenario where people are feeling like they're not supported by their leaders, I don't think it's coming from the fact that we have these like callous middle managers that just don't care about their people. I think we actually see the opposite, and that upskilling in this space is really important.
Is what's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, while we're waiting for answers, we are doing some work around how to upskill, obviously, because we've identified this and we're continuing to research it. We're going to continue to look at different cohorts as well, because not necessarily just at work, but in other environments as well, and how it impacts different parts of Australian society. But that's kind of a watch this space piece. Liv, what sort of answers are we getting, and whether we can share them? How will we share them?
I can read them out. I've still got a couple coming in. I'll just give 10 more seconds. Okay. All right, ending. We've got, let's have a look. I will read them out. Let's see. Okay, we've got, I think it's a two-way street, some self-reflection and honesty by both parties. A discussion is important.
Yep.
Improve sense of belonging by training managers.
Yep. Oh, there's Kevin. Sorry, everyone.
We had to let Kevin in. Offer opportunities for growth. Regular check-ins with staff at all levels. Raising awareness and providing support resources. Support resources. Support resources.
Wow.
Train colleagues, train managers, combine personal and professional supports. Commit to following up on feedback from pulse surveys. Otherwise, it is moot. I love that.
Love that too.
Bring awareness and resources, open dialogues, and encourage tailored solutions from teams. We've got lots on resources here. Talk about it, equip leaders, have the conversation, support leaders, engage with your staff, show empathy, regular check-ins, build relationship.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot. It's very mixed.
What I love about this, and we can certainly make these somehow available when we do a shorter version of this. But what I love about this is the meet me in the middle, that it isn't just the focus on one or the other. And I think that's kind of the next step, is to think about what does that meeting mean, and what does that look like, and how, and what are the resources that are involved. Guys, we've run out of time, so we are now sitting at 12:45 on the dot. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Maddie. Thanks, Joep. Thank you, everybody who came. Hope this was thought-provoking. We will be following up with some other stuff, and just have a lovely day wherever you are sitting. Go and get some sunshine. Go and do something that gives you joy. Go and, sit and reflect, do whatever. But thank you for coming.
Ain't nobody getting sunshine on this side of the country.
Sunshine from within.
Sunshine from within. Sunshine from within. All right, see you all.
Bye.